False persecution. I was sitting in a police interrogation room in the mid-sized Midwestern U.S. city I had lived in all my life, my friend and attorney Ralph Boston sitting next to me. Ralph whispered to me for the second time in the last 5 minutes. "Lucas, again I advise you not to say anything. Just exercise your right to counsel." I'm Lucas Worthington. It's an upper-class name, especially when combined with my pretentious, never-used middle name Rockefeller, because my parents are so damn rich. I'm rich too, but not because of their money. I earned my own by being a .com specialist, so in my 29 years, I'm worth over $50 million. However, I don't belong to the upper class. I'm just a regular guy who just happens to have money. I drink beer, play basketball, sit in the stands at baseball games, get into scuffles and fights, and spend at least 40 hours a week doing volunteer work, mostly, though not exclusively, for a charity I set up for underprivileged kids in poor neighborhoods in my city. I'm about to be questioned by 2 detectives about the untimely murder of my beautiful but unfaithful wife Ashley and one of her lovers, Brad Sidley, that occurred a couple nights ago in Sidley's apartment. I'm not too brokenhearted about it because after barely marrying me, Ashley had blossomed into a real cheating gold digger, and within the next 2 weeks I was about to file divorce papers on grounds of adultery. As for Brad Sidley, he was a complete lowlife who I beat the crap out of twice. Not because of Ashley, but simply because he was a loud-mouthed braggart who said the wrong things to me at the wrong time. When experienced Detective Roy Benson entered the room, he was followed by a newcomer, Detective Will Watson, even though Watson had already been on the force for several years. How Watson was promoted to detective, I have no idea. He's good-looking and a real talker, which some people consider charming, but in my opinion, he's dumb as a cork. My eyebrows raised and I inwardly smiled. Benson began like this. "I understand you're willing to talk to us, Lucas, despite the presence of your spokesperson. First of all, Detective Benson, I am not your friend, so you will address me as Mr. Worthington," I said. But before I could finish my thought, Watson chuckled. "Titled asshole." I turned to Watson, looked right at him and said, "You know, Will, every time I see you, I think of the movie Menagerie." A perplexed expression appeared on his face, but before he could say anything else, I continued. "I remember Dean Vermeer telling Flounder, 'You can't live your whole life fat, dumb, and ugly, son.' Well, the quote isn't exactly accurate, but close enough. You remind me so much of Flounder, and for the sake of making this interrogation easier, keep your fat, dumb, and ugly mouth shut, or I'll have to do to you what I did to you in the locker room our junior year at good old Hudson High after soccer practice. You remember that, don't you, asshole?" It brought back fond memories for me, but not so fond for Will. In the locker room after soccer practice, Watson called me a horny wuss and pushed me. I fell on his ass, clasped him in my arms, and stuck his head in the toilet. So I got suspended from the game, but it was worth it. "There's no reason to say that, Mr. Worthington," Benson snapped. "Then tell your lapdog to shut up. I'd like to give you answers, but I'm not going to put up with his behavior," I growled. Watson looked like he wanted to lash out at me, though he was too cowardly to do so. You might wonder why I was stupid enough to piss off a cop who could make my life difficult, but the reason would become clear later. Benson whispered something to Watson, and he leaned back in his chair, staring at me. Before I was so rudely interrupted, I was also going to say that this interview is only being conducted because your department has agreed to videotape the entire process, and in the understanding that as soon as you lie to me for the first time, it will be over. Also, ask your questions efficiently, because I will be done in 2 hours. "We don't agree to a time limit," Benson said, visibly annoyed. "Obviously, either you haven't spoken to Chief Jackson or you haven't listened to him, because I've made those terms clear to him and he's acknowledged them. Do you agree or can I leave now?" Benson and I looked at each other for 30 seconds before he said, "Okay, let's get started." I defiantly took off my watch and started the timer function. Benson, with Watson only whispering to him if he wanted to ask something because he knew I would never answer any of his questions, began his interrogation. I answered all their questions honestly, even though it was clear they didn't believe me, because I knew they could never prove that it was me who killed my cheating wife or her lover. About an hour after Watson whispered something to Benson, he said, "How do you explain the presence of your DNA on Sidley's clothes?" I stopped the timer of my watch, put it on my wrist, and said, "This is your first and only lie. Goodbye," and stood up, whereupon Ralph and I walked out. Benson and Watson shouted something after us, but I neither listened nor paid any attention to what they said. Ralph and I walked to his office, which was only a few blocks from the police department, and giggled with each other most of the way. When we entered the closed conference room, Ralph laughed. "I don't know if you're the bravest or the dumbest client I've ever had." "Couldn't I be both?" I grinned. "No." "Why were you so confident when dealing with those cops, Lucas?" "For two reasons. One, I didn't do it, and two, I have an indisputable alibi, backed up by a video, for the entire possible time of the murder, which, according to the medical examiner, was between noon and 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 5th of this month." "Where's the video from?" "It's a video from the basketball clinic where I was examined, in a town 90 miles away, and which has all the times on the video, starting at 11 a.m., an hour lunch break at 12:30, and ending before 4 o'clock. It was shot by a guy whose regular job is police videographer, but I paid him to shoot this clinic, since I'm going to use much of it for presentations at boys and girls clubs around the country, in connection with my charitable organization. I have a dozen copies in my safe at home. Let me ask the paralegal to go with you to get a copy for me." Ralph smiled. "Not until you buy me lunch. Working with Watson and Benson has made me hungry," I hummed. 2 days later at 6:30 in the morning, Watson and about half a dozen other cops served me with a search warrant. I'm sure they meant to wake me up and make me uncomfortable, but I'd already been working out for a half hour. When Watson handed over the warrant, he had a big shit-eater grin on his face. "Have fun, asshole," I muttered, pulling out my bike to finish my workout outside. "Don't steal anything. All valuables are cataloged at my place." Watson replied, irritated, "I wouldn't think of it. The two reasons I had no problem leaving them to search my house were that I had nothing to hide, and that I had professionally hidden high-tech cameras in every room, which was how I had originally caught Ashley cheating, though I had never informed her of the evidence. When I returned from my bike ride a little over an hour later, the cops were already leaving. Watson saw me, and with a wide grin held out an evidence bag that appeared to contain a gun. Since I didn't have a gun, I knew it had been planted, but I wasn't worried because the cameras recorded that it had been planted. After checking the cameras, it took about an hour, I immediately called Ralph and brought him up to speed. 2 days later, I was about to be arrested. Ralph's friend at the police station had alerted him, and he and I showed up at the station just as the task force was about to move out to arrest me at my charity in the most public way possible, having already arranged for 2 local TV stations to be present. They were very angry that I had stolen their glory. I only smiled. Ralph had already petitioned the fairest judge in the local court for a bail hearing the next morning. I only spent 1 night in jail. Those bastards put me in a cell with a real scumbag named Melvin Brixey, who I'm sure arranged for my beating. That didn't work out either, for 2 reasons. I caught Melvin off guard by telling him as soon as I entered the cell that I knew the cops had promised him something for beating me up. After that, I immediately told him that I was rich, and that I was no slouch myself, and if he testified in my favor, I would pay for the best criminal defense attorney in the county to take his case, and that if he didn't like that deal, he would be surprised at my physical reaction, and that I wouldn't stop until one of us was dead. Given his size and background, Melvin would have eventually beaten me to a pulp, but he liked me immediately for my aggressive approach. When Ralph met me at my bail hearing the next day, I told him I was paying for Melvin's defense and asked his senior partner, a criminal defense attorney, to meet with Melvin that afternoon. I shook Melvin's hand in farewell, and the 2 jailers accompanying me looked at us with their mouths hanging open. The district attorney himself was present at the bail hearing. It was an election year. This is a total asshole who had dealt with my father when he was in private practice and got what he deserved. He saw this case as a high-profile case to ensure his re-election. He made some very disparaging comments about me, which made me very angry. Fortunately, Ralph has a much cooler head than I do, so he smoothed out the DA's arguments with logic instead of calling him an asshole, which he was. Ralph also pointed out the disruption to my charity work that would occur if I was jailed, and the fact that I was clearly not a flight risk. I was released on $2 million cash bail and made to hand over my passport, but no wrist monitor. When I got back to Ralph's office, in a little over 2 hours, we had worked out our strategy. Finished, we grinned. He immediately had his technical expert review the DVD of my alibi that I had given him. We put the relevant scenes from my home cameras during the police search into an easily displayed format, and Ralph began contacting alibi witnesses to tell them to cooperate with the police as little as possible. The first thing Ralph did, however, was to file a notice with the court that we were exercising our right under state and local law to have a trial within 90 days of my arrest, which was infinitely faster than the prosecutor and the court were used to. Most criminal defendants, especially if they are out on bail, want to drag out the process as long as possible. Also, unlike most defendants, I did not avoid the media. I gave interviews to every reporter who asked for it. Radio, TV, newspapers, social media, whatever. In every interview, I called the district attorney a jackass who is incompetent and should be removed in the next election, and the police detectives handling my case corrupt and ineffective, while praising the rest of the police force. I know for a fact that I pissed off a lot of people. That was my intention. The prosecutor appointed a female prosecutor, Suzanne Carney, to lead the case. She was young but already experienced, though she had just transferred to his office from a larger city after a messy divorce, which I learned about by finding her on the internet. She was only 30, only a year older than me, and judging from the photos, she was stunning. Although she was clearly intelligent and competent, taking less than 90 days to prepare a case, when she had other responsibilities and was in a new working environment, was very difficult for her. So after the case had been in her possession for about 2 weeks, she requested a plea conference with Ralph and me. We agreed just because I wanted to meet with her. We went to her office where she was waiting with 2 assistant prosecutors, Benson Watson, and an attractive, though oddly dressed young woman whose title was unknown to me and who had not been introduced to us. Ralph and I were polite, but said little. Carney listed the highlights of her case. The murder weapon, a .380 caliber handgun, was found in my house during the search and positively identified by ballistics, and my DNA was found on it. My alibi video cuts off at 13:50, giving me enough time to commit the murder by 15:00. In the ME's opinion, I had a strong motive because Sidley and Ashley were having an affair, and it was cheaper to get rid of her than to divorce her. And my history of arguments with Sidley in the past, where she claimed Sidley had the upper hand over me. This was clearly not true, but the source of this information was a friend of mine who, while not lying, misreported it. However, through her magnanimity, she agreed to find me guilty of first-degree manslaughter with an 8 to 15-year sentence. As prearranged during her presentation, Ralph and I just smiled. It seemed to make everyone on her side nervous. When she finished, I said, "Miss Carney, could you and I please meet individually, without strangers?" This directly stunned her entire team. I can't do that. It's unethical to talk to you alone when you're represented by an attorney." "Actually, Miss Carney," Ralph smiled, "since both Mr. Worthington and I are in full agreement, there's no ethical problem, and we'll both sign a statement to that effect." After a minute of awkward back-and-forth negotiations, I grinned and said, "Please call your secretary, dictate this statement to her or him, and have him or her bring it here for me and Ralph to sign." Suzanne called her secretary, dictated what she wanted, and while we waited for the document, I engaged Suzanne in the nicest non-legal conversation I was capable of, smiling at her all the while. Less than 5 minutes later, her secretary, a man, walked in with the document. I was glad I said she or he. After a cursory review, Ralph and I signed it. The secretary and one of the ADAs witnessed our signatures, and the secretary left to make copies for us. After that, everyone left the room except Suzanne and me. As soon as the door closed, I began, "Suzanne, since you are relatively new here, I want to tell you some things you may not know. Detective Watson is corrupt, and your boss, the district attorney, is incompetent. If you pursue this case, both the police and your office will be utterly disgraced. disgraced to the point where it will be difficult to recover from it. Others who work with you do not have your best interests at heart. Do you have something specific you want to tell me? She pouted. No, I'll save that for the court if you decide to pursue it further. I'm just warning you that all is not as it seems, and you should look more closely at the discovery of the gun and my alibi. I don't want you to get personally responsible for this. If you don't investigate further, I suggest you ask the DA to reassign the case. Why do you care? She's pouting again. Because I like you, and I'm looking for a new relationship now that my cheating wife is gone, and I'd like to get to know you better, I replied with a smile. Suzanne was obviously stunned, because for 2 minutes she just stared at me with her mouth hanging open. Finally, she regained the ability to speak and asked, Are you serious, or is this some kind of trick? I'll tell you how serious I am. I know your favorite artist is Bon Jovi, and I will use my iPhone to buy you and me 2 front-row tickets to his show in New York at my friend's house for his next concert in exactly 123 days and invite you to come with me. I smiled, pulling out my iPhone. After another long pause, she said, You're crazy. Just tell me whether or not you accept my plea bargain, which becomes null and void after today. Miss Carney, I'm sorry if I've upset you. Perhaps after I'm found not guilty, you'll change your mind, and I'll be as kind as I can be to you. However, in answer to your question, I reject your offer and any possible future plea bargains because I am innocent. At this point, while she was still in a semi-shocked state, I quickly took her hand, kissed it, and left the room. As we left the building, passing Watson, I gave him the middle finger. Ralph chuckled. How did it go? He asked. She turned down my offer of a date at the Bon Jovi concert in New York, but she was interested in me. I'll try again after the trial. Given what happens there, will she ever talk to you again? I hope so, I grinned. Maybe she'll develop a sense of humor. Dream on, Ralph laughed. I don't want to spoil the outcome of my trial for you in advance, but I have to say a few things. The DVD we gave the prosecution with my alibi seemed to cut off at 1:50, but if you kept playing it for another 30 minutes, it resumed at 1:50 and showed me until it cut off at 4 p.m. If the prosecutor's office or the cops had continued to replay it instead of clipping it on static, they would have seen it. Also, the DA's office was under the impression that Ashley and I didn't have a prenup, but we did, even though the only people who knew about it were my business attorney, Ralph, and her friend, who was a witness to the signing, but now lives 2,000 miles away. We listed her as a witness on a long list, but the prosecution was never able to contact her, and local rules didn't require us to reveal what witnesses might say. Fortunately, we got a good but unsentimental judge, though given the strength of our case, anyone would have been fine. The jury was selected in only 2 hours. Our jury consultant and Ralph were pleased. Even though we felt we were doing well, there was no reason not to pick good jurors. The prosecution began by having the medical examiner come forward to show pictures of the horrible death and talk about the time and cause of death. Between noon and 3 o'clock in the afternoon of the 5th, 2.380 caliber bullet wounds to Sidley's head and a through-and-through wound from which Ashley died was his main testimony. Ralph's only cross-examination was directed to the exact time and manner of death. The police witness who assessed my financial situation testified as to how much money I would have had to pay Ashley if we were divorced, since adultery is not grounds for a divorce case, and there was no evidence of a prenuptial agreement. Ralph scored a lot of points by introducing as an exhibit a prenuptial agreement. Documents and other exhibits used only for impeachment should not be shown to the other party before trial. That limited her payout in the event of a divorce due to her infidelity to only $50,000 and in the event of a divorce for any other reason to only $1 million. Ralph also embarrassed the witness by asking if she had ever tried to contact my business attorney to see if there was a prenup, rather than just basing it on what she had heard from Ashley's friends. Her answer of no brought a look of disgust to the faces of several jurors. Suzanne then called in a ballistics expert who positively identified the .380 caliber pistol found in my house as the murder weapon and a DNA expert who showed that the weapon had my DNA on it. Ralph cross-examined to get the point across that the ballistics expert did not personally know how the gun was found, and the DNA expert testified that there was no DNA on the bullets in the gun, and that, given the places on the gun where DNA was found, it could have gotten there by transfer. Up to that point, Suzanne had seemed confident. She got the first real indication that her prosecution was falling apart when she called her star witness, Detective Will Watson. Watson testified about the search warrant for my house, how 30 minutes later, Corporal Cheryl Billings, one of the officers conducting the search, found the gun, called Detective Watson over, picked it up with gloved hands and put it in an evidence bag while Detective Watson looked on. His testimony took only about 20 minutes. When Ralph stood up for cross-examination, in his hand was the remote control to operate the projector for the large screen in the courtroom. "Detective Watson, what were you wearing on the day of the search?" Ralph asked. I don't remember. Ralph showed a photograph taken outside my house with all sorts of police officers around, taken by a camera on the front door, showing him wearing dark blue slacks, a light blue long-sleeved shirt, a distinctive red and yellow tie, black dress shoes, and a tweed sports jacket that looked bulky. "Is this a photograph of you on the day of the search showing your clothes?" Yeah, it looks like it," Watson replied. "I didn't ask you if it looked like that. Are your clothes on the day of the search depicted or not in this photograph? If necessary, we can call Corporal Billings or other officers to testify," Ralph growled grudgingly. Yes, that's what I was wearing on the day of the search." "How often do you wear that tie?" "Not often, actually. It's a new tie, and as it was an important day, I decided to wear it," Watson replied. "Had you ever been to Mr. Worthington's house before the day of the search?" After a pause, beginning to suspect something, Watson replied, "I don't remember." "You don't remember? Are you friends with Mr. Worthington or with his ex-wife, Ashley?" "No." "What reason could you have for being in their home at any other time other than during the search?" "I can't think of any." "You've never been in the Worthington house except on the day of the search, have you, Detective Watson?" Ralph growled. After another pause, Watson fidgeted in his chair and answered, "No." "Here's a videotape of someone taking a green toothbrush from Mr. Worthington's bathroom," Ralph immediately continued, showing the scene from my bathroom camera. "Is that you with your distinctive yellow and red tie, Detective Watson?" Yeah. I've never seen that video before," he mumbled awkwardly. "I'm sure you haven't," Ralph grinned. "Just answer the question." After another delay, "Yes." "Similarly, are you the one taking some of the red and white clothes from the laundry basket in Mr. Worthington's laundry room?" After another delay, "Yes." "Is it you who took the gun from under your tweed jacket in Mr. Worthington's den, rubbed it with the green bristles of a toothbrush, then rubbed it on your red and white shirt, and then put it in the top drawer of the closet near the window in Mr. Worthington's den?" A shocked Watson stared silently at the screen as the videotape was played 3 times in succession. "I plead the Fifth Amendment," he gasped. "Did you have an affair with Mr. Worthington's wife, Ashley?" A stunned Watson mumbled so quietly that the court reporter asked him to speak louder. "I'm pushing for the Fifth Amendment. Here is a video taken 2 weeks before the murder showing you making love to Ashley in one of Mr. Worthington's guest bedrooms. After vividly showing the video for 15 seconds, the judge said, "You may turn off the video, Mr. Boston. We get the point. Answer the question, Detective Watson." The man mumbled, "I plead the Fifth Amendment." "No more questions," Ralph proclaimed. The entire courtroom stared at Suzanne as she slowly stood up. "Your Honor, may we take a recess?" "You certainly need one, Miss Carney." "We'll reconvene in 2 hours," the judge said, and then banged her gavel. All the jurors either smiled or shook their heads. Detective Benson was in the courtroom. I walked up to him and asked, "Are you going to arrest Watson now?" He had a glazed look on his face, but he replied, "I don't have a warrant. But there's probable cause to charge him, if not with murder, at least with tampering with evidence," I replied. "Murder?" he gasped. "Who the hell do you think killed Ashley and Sidley? It was the guy who planted the murder weapon. Grow some balls, Benson, and arrest him," I growled. To my surprise, Benson nodded to the bailiff, and the 2 of them placed Watson under arrest. As we were eating lunch, Ralph got a call from Suzanne. She wanted to meet. We expected her to say she was dropping the case. To our surprise, instead, she said, "I talked to the district attorney and he said we'll accept a plea of guilty to second-degree manslaughter, only 2 years in prison." Outraged, I yelled, "Are you telling me the asshole Watson who killed my wife will only get 2 years?" Suzanne, who had the decency to look embarrassed, replied, "No, I'm offering this plea agreement to you because we believe you probably had some kind of relationship with Watson." I was at a loss for words. I launched into such an angry tirade at her that she looked scared to death, and it was only because Ralph had the strength and size to restrain me that I didn't punch her in the face. I would never have hurt her, but outwardly, I was angrier than ever. As we ran out of the conference room, I yelled, "What a fool you are!" Ralph thwarted my anger when leading me away. He whispered, "Does this mean you won't take her to the Bon Jovi concert in New York?" I stared at him for a few seconds, still blazing with anger, and then burst out laughing. When we reconvened after a 2-hour delay, the judge called the lawyers to the lectern. They were chatting animatedly. When Ralph returned, I asked him what was the matter. He said, the judge assumed that Suzanne would drop the suit because of prejudice. When she refused, the judge made a pass at her, but she wouldn't budge, saying the prosecutor wanted her to continue. I chuckled. After Suzanne called as her next witness the guy she thought told the detectives that Sidley had beaten me up, giving me a motive to kill him, she realized everything was going to hell when on direct examination, Ralph didn't even have to cross-examine, he said, "Detective Watson must have misunderstood me. I told him that although Sidley instigated the fight and hit Lucas first, Lucas gave him a punch in the face. Sidley spent the night in the hospital." Suzanne then called the videographer about recording my alibi. After clarifying that he was the official videographer for the police department of the city where my basketball clinic was located, she asked, "Have you reviewed the videotape you made, which is State's Exhibit 14? "Yes." "Is it a complete videotape of the event?" "Yes." "Does it show that the defendant, Mr. Worthington, was there until approximately 1:50 p.m.? "No, it shows that he was there until about 4 p.m., and even after that we talked to him until about 4:30 p.m. when he left to drive 90 miles back home." "What?" the prosecutor said in surprise. "I watched the DVD and he stops at 1:50 p.m., and after that there's just static." "You obviously didn't watch the static, and I have no idea how it got on your copy of the DVD. If you do, you will see that it goes on until 4 o'clock. Suzanne gave the witness a remote control. He fast-forwarded through the interference, showing the rest of the video, and she stopped him when he fast-forwarded to 3 hours and then sat down. Ralph made the witness fast-forward to the end. The DVD showed 16:01, then the videographer confirmed that he had seen me with his own eyes at the event from about 11 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Suzanne, with the look of a hunted dog, said, "The prosecution has everything." Usually at this point, the judge would dismiss the jury and the defense would make a trifling motion for a directed verdict. The judge didn't bother with that. She asked, "Mr. Boston, do you have a motion?" "Yes, Your Honor, I move for a directed verdict of not guilty." "Granted," she said, tapping her gavel. "Miss Carney, I'll see you in my chambers. The jury is dismissed with my thanks." After that, the press was hungry for interviews. On the courthouse steps, Ralph first ranted about how the prosecution had done me a terrible favor and that he knew from the beginning what the outcome of the case would be. And if the police and the prosecution had been honest, the case would never have been brought. He was a bit circumspect in what he said. I wasn't. After talking to Ralph, I said that anyone who would vote for a dishonest district attorney in the upcoming election was a fool, that Watson was the killer, and that the police should do their own investigation. I also said I would sue the DA for false prosecution. Another lawyer from Ralph's firm filed suit the next day, naming both the DA, Suzanne, whom I thought was a heartless fool, and Detective Watson as defendants. The local media hyped the story. The district attorney and the police chief went into hiding. 3 days after the charges were dropped, as I was finishing up work at my charity, having just run an after-school program for underprivileged girls and boys, a young woman approached me. I vaguely recognized her. "Mr. Worthington, I'm Shirley Williams," she said, extending her hand. I shook it and then said, I think I've seen you before, but I can't recognize you. Yes, although we have not been introduced to each other, I sat in the courtroom when you had your first plea negotiations with Miss Carney, and I was present at your trial. Now everything fell into place. Although her dress was understated and she was wearing what appeared to be deliberately ugly glasses, I had initially noticed that she was attractive, and now facing me, she looked even better. What do you have to do with my case? I asked, holding her hand a little longer than was necessary or appropriate. I am an intern, fresh out of law school and an observer. My internship ends next week. Miss Carney was too embarrassed to come to you herself, so she asked me to come talk to you, Shirley continued. Let's go to my office, I smiled, making small talk with her as we walked the couple hundred yards to my office building from the recreation center, where I held the after-school program. When we entered my office, I motioned for her to take a seat. She looked around. Your office is much nicer and tidier than I expected, she said. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I smiled. She smiled back, then continued. All members of the prosecution team apologize for the errors in judgment that occurred during your case, but are puzzled by the static gap in the DVD you provided as an alibi. They are puzzled, aren't they? I smiled again. Besides, Miss Carney and everyone else involved in the trial really want to apologize for everything. If things had been investigated more thoroughly, the case would have been dismissed before trial. It is, I smiled again. After a pause, Shirley said, You're not going to make this case easy, are you? Should I? I smiled again. Shirley sighed. Besides, Miss Carney wants to know what she can do to get you to drop the lawsuit against her. After a long pause, I asked, Why are you here and not her? I think that after your tirade against her on the last day of court, she is afraid of you. Why was she such a heartless bitch before I jumped her? She should have stood up to the DA and dismissed the case right after Watson's testimony. She realizes that now and apologizes profusely. Let me ask you a few questions. Of course, you don't have to answer them, and if you don't want to, you can get up and leave without any comment from me. Do you understand? Yes, she answered apprehensively. How old are you? 26. Are those glasses fake? Yes. Why do you wear them? To discourage guys from hitting on me. Are you in a romantic relationship? No. Are you heterosexual? Yes. What are your plans after your internship ends at the end of next week? I hope to be offered a job in the prosecutor's office, but if not, I will find a job at a local law firm since I like the area. I already have 2 possible job openings. What are you doing Saturday night? As of today, I don't have any plans. Maybe my roommate and I will go clubbing. What's your personal cell phone number? XXXX. All my questions and all her answers were asked completely nonchalantly, without emotion or facial expressions. After a long pause, I said, Tell Miss Carney that if you are offered a job in the prosecutor's office, I will drop the lawsuit against her. Tell her to tell the district attorney that if he makes a sincere public apology, Watson will be charged with my ex-wife's murder, and not just his current charge of forgery, and if you are offered a job in the DA's office, I will drop the case against her. Shirley grinned. Are you teasing me? I replied. Absolutely not. In fact, let me put it in writing. I went to the computer, wrote out what I had just said, printed it out, signed, and dated it. At the bottom I wrote, Otherwise I'll see you in court. I handed the paper to Shirley. She looked it over, smiled, and said, Thank you, Mr. Worthington, and held out her hand. Shaking it, I said, You're welcome, Miss Williams. Looking out the window and seeing her leaving my building, I called her cell phone. She pulled it out of a pocket on the side of her purse, looked at the caller ID, and smiled, answering, Shirley Williams. Hello, Miss Williams, I said. Lucas Worthington. Wasn't that Lucas Worthington I just met? She asked with a slight chuckle in her voice. That's the one. I realize you don't have any firm plans for Saturday night, and I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me and go see The Mousetrap at Artists' Playhouse. It's the longest play in history. From the window, I saw her smile broadly. After some delay, she said, Yes, I agree, Mr. Worthington. Would you like me to meet you at the restaurant? No, if you don't mind, Please text me your address, and I'll pick you up at 6:15 on Saturday night." "I will," she said, still smiling. After she ended the conversation, I saw her typing on her smartphone, and as soon as she returned it to her purse, I heard a beep on my cell phone. The message included her address along with a smiling emoji. Between Tuesday, when Shirley met with me, and the time I picked her up on Saturday, I paid for and received a full report on her from a private investigator. I didn't need another gold digger like Ashley, and I felt a connection to Shirley, who had intrigued me in the short time we'd been in contact. Turns out she had gone through a pretty messy divorce in her first year of law school when her husband cheated on her, was getting excellent grades in law school, did charity work part-time, and had all the hallmarks of a good citizen who grew up in a high, middle-class neighborhood with respectable parents, a doctor and an artist, and two older brothers, a business owner and a doctor. When I picked up Shirley, she looked great. Understated but stylish clothes, light makeup, attractively styled hair, no fake glasses. I asked to let her meet her roommate before we left. I chatted with the roommate and gave her 2 tickets to a concert at a local venue the following weekend. It made an impression on both her and Shirley. Dinner with Shirley was the strangest dinner I've ever had. After making small talk on the way to the restaurant, the most expensive in our town, at least in my opinion, we had only been sitting for a minute when she said, "We don't need to exchange basic information about each other, do we, Lucas? I mean, I already know almost all the essential facts about your background from the investigation the police and prosecutor's office conducted on you prior to your trial, and I'm sure you have experienced people who have done a deep dive on me. Why don't we just get down to what makes us tick, what makes us happy, what our goals in life are, important things like where we went to school, how many kids are in our families, etc." I was surprised, but not as much as I might have thought. "Okay, you first. What are your short and long-term goals in life?" I grinned. The research I'd done on Shirley, combined with the exchange of information during our 101-minute dinner, meant that I knew her as well as anyone in my life. We had to skip dessert to get to the show on time, but since we both stated that we are not big dessert lovers, it wasn't a big deal. The Mousetrap is an Agatha Christie comedy murder mystery with a denouement at the end. Neither of us had ever seen it before, but we both loved it and decided that the 2+ hours we spent watching it was worth it. When the play was over, it was 11:15. Shirley was becoming more and more comfortable with body contact, and I was becoming more and more appreciative of her body and personality. When we got to my car, I asked, "Would you like to go clubbing or do something else? It wasn't late in the evening for us 20-somethings. She looked into my eyes the way a cobra or a mongoose looks at its prey. I couldn't tell which, for a long moment before answering. Her answer, actually a question, was the most surprising part of an amazing evening. After a deep sigh, she asked, "Have you ever slept together on a first date?" It took me a while to realize the question, but I didn't bother asking her to repeat it. My measured answer was, "No." "Why do you ask?" "Well, we know each other as well as people who have been seeing each other every weekend for months. The only thing we don't know about each other is how compatible we are between the sheets or on the kitchen table or in the pool or, you know. I am intensely attracted to you. If you feel the same for me, let's make this night a first for both of us," she said stoically, and then smiled broadly. I pulled her close, wrapped my arms around her, and gave her a series of short kisses with increasing passion. The last one wasn't short. It lasted a good 2 minutes and cemented in my mind that she was a great kisser and a very warm person. When we broke the kiss, I asked, "Would you like to see my etchings?" She laughed, replying, "Come on! Only stupid people enter into intense relationships immediately after just getting rid of a cheating spouse, Shirley through divorce, me through murder. Obviously, Shirley and I are idiots. When Em got to my house, our contact was not tumultuous. We didn't tear each other's clothes off. Instead, we stood face to face and looked into each other's eyes. By this time, I realized that I really liked Shirley's personality. And her body. Every part of her body that could be identified when she was dressed looked perfect. With the exception of her butt, nothing was too big and nothing was too small. Since I like big, firm asses, I was delighted. Shirley slowly and methodically pulled my shirt off just a touch as her eyes were right on mine. When she took it off, I decided to say what was on my mind. I want it on the kitchen table. You do it all by yourself, she hummed. I kissed her and lifted her sculpted hips so that her legs were on my torso. And without breaking the kiss, though hitting a few walls because my eyes were practically closed, I carried her into the kitchen. Luckily, there were only papers and a few pieces of stainless utensils on the table, nothing breakable, because I swept them off the table with one hand, then put her ass on the table and broke the kiss. When we looked at each other again, I reached under her dress. You're really bad, aren't you? I smiled and she hummed, Hell yeah. I had a feeling of euphoria that I don't think I'd ever experienced before. After a while, we both came to our senses. I lifted my body off her and she sat up. To bed, was her only comment. I jumped around until I had thrown off my shoes, pants, boxers, and one sock while she pulled her dress over her head and unhooked her bra. She jumped into my arms and I kissed her intermittently as I stumbled up the stairs, bumping into walls now and then to my bedroom. Although it wasn't a deliberate decision on our part, we ended up spending the entire weekend together. Outside of bed, she was more pleasant than any other woman I knew. Fun, genuinely affectionate, playful, and it was easy to talk to her about a variety of topics, from the mundane and mundane to the serious and spiritual. As we ate breakfast at the same table where I had taken her less than 48 hours earlier, I suddenly remembered what we had talked about in my office. In between devouring a cheese omelet, I asked, Shirley, since we had so much fun this weekend, I forgot to ask if you gave Suzanne and Shithead my suggestions. After swallowing a piece of English muffin, she replied, Yes, Suzanne was very pleased and guaranteed that I would be offered full-time employment next week. She chewed and swallowed another piece of muffin and then continued, However, she told me not to mention the offer to the asshole. Everyone, including him, knows he's going to lose the election because of you, and he just might put off my job offer if I tell him you said that. Plus, she thinks he'll never apologize, and besides, she wants your lawsuit against him to continue. I nodded in satisfaction and agreement as I continued to eat. What's actually funny is that Suzanne asked if you were interested in her personally. I guess despite your tirade against her on the last day of court, she's hoping for a relationship. She gave me a sinister smirk after that comment. I grinned back. That's not going to happen. I found something better. I smiled and finished my breakfast. When I parked in front of Shirley's house, she was more candid than any other person in my life. So, Lucas, we've known each other for a few days now, and we've found that we're more compatible in and out of bed with you than with anyone else we've ever known, and yet thought possible. You know what you'd do if you were really smart? She hummed and then kissed me on the lips with a quick but meaningful kiss. You'd ask me to move in with you this weekend, with the idea of giving me a ring after we've lived together for a few months. After another kiss and a smile, she walked out the door, wiggling her pleasantly large, firm ass, and walked into the building without looking back. I thought hard, for about 30 seconds. Then I pulled out my cell phone, dialed the number that was now #1 on my contact list, and when Shirley answered, I said, Listen, Shirley, I just had a better idea. Why don't you move in with me next weekend? Why would I do that, Lucas? It's so sudden. Are you sure about this? Yeah, I've been thinking about it for, forever. Okay. She laughed. But you're going to have to pay my share of the rent because Judy can't do it on her own. And she cut the call. Tricky fool. I grinned to myself. I could go on for many more pages about how stupid we'd been to throw ourselves into a relationship right away, how amazing it was that it not only worked out but made our lives better than they could have been, how both of us embraced my charity work even though she was a tough prosecutor, and how everything was right with the world. But one episode will tell you all you need to know. I was in the courtroom when Shirley Worthington, 8 months pregnant, gave a masterful closing statement at Will Watson's murder and obstruction of justice trial for the deaths of Ashley Worthington and Brad Sidley. In her closing statement, she convinced everyone that Watson was in love with Ashley, was outraged that she was having an affair with Sidley, and decided to kill Sidley to get his hands on her and frame me. Unfortunately, he was careless in shooting Sidley, and one bullet went through him into Ashley, killing her. As the jury left the courtroom, I gave Shirley a big hug and kiss and gently stroked her belly, telling her how proud I was of her. By the time we returned from our afternoon snack, it hadn't been more than an hour since the jury began deliberations. She had received word that the jury had reached a verdict. After the foreman had said guilty on all counts, I waited while Shirley accepted congratulations from everyone around her, even opposing counsel. When it was my turn to congratulate, I whispered in her ear, "Tonight I'll arrange a nice bubble bath for you. I'll have your favorite food delivered from the most expensive Italian restaurant in town. I'll give you a foot massage, and then I'll satisfy you so much." Shirley smiled, kissed me, and said, "Sounds like a good plan. At least now that you'll love me. You won't be able to get me pregnant anymore. The end."